Hey everybody, Phil from Two Forks. So I came across some old growth Doug fir. Well, my son did. He was demoing a house, and they were up in the rafters, and he called and said, "You want it?" I said, "Yes, I do want it." And it looked like this when when I got it. And fortunately, I could see through all that ugliness to see this. And I really like Doug fir. I like the color of it. I like the figure of it. I like it. I'm not going to make a lot of furniture out of it, but we needed a little table outside, so I thought, perfect, I'll do it. I didn't want to see the end grain, however, and I needed a way to keep it flat, so I made these breadboard ends. And I thought I'd show you guys how I do it. And when I say how I do it, I tend to not be super precise about things. I don't have billions of dollars in equipment, so I need to do things in a way that I can make some adjustments if I make a mistake or two, which I always do. So if you're like me and you make a few mistakes and you don't want them to be fatal to the project, follow along and I'll show you how to do this. Breadboard ends aren't there. It's not voodoo like dovetails, but there is some trickery to it. You got to sort of understand how the motion works and all that. And the idea here is to keep the table flat, but underneath here are some mortise and tenons, and the wood moves inside these mortises and tenons. It's really only glued sort of in one spot, and these dowels are what keep the breadboard tight to the table. It's kind of an interesting concept, but I know from some of my benches in here, I get a lot of movement in the summertime from humidity and so forth. So I expect that this thing's going to move, and I expect that the breadboard's going to keep it flat and allow it to move. So let me show you a couple things, how I do it, how I can do it so that there's margin of error that I can work with, and some things that just keep me a little bit safer when I do it, because there's some routing involved and I hate routing. So let me throw this thing down on the table, change the camera, and I'll show you how I get started on it. Okay, so you can see what I'm going to have here. 3 tenons basically, and these guys are about 9 inches. This will get cut out and the ends will get cut out as well. I'll leave a little stub tenon right in here, but these will get flush right up to the edge. So what I wanted to show you, that I didn't, when I went to cut my table, I didn't cut it exactly to the length that I wanted it to be. I left this little back portion on here. And the reason I do that is when I'm routing this, these tenons are going to be 2 inches long. And when I'm routing, if I'm back sort of at the back edge of the 2-inch part, there's not a lot of router base still on anything secure. If this wasn't here, the router then can tilt down if you're not careful, which I'm not, and I hate routing. So anyway, I'm sure there's some sort of plate or some sort of gizmo that, you know, prevents this from happening that you can purchase, but I don't have one. Maybe I'll get one in the future, who knows. But this helps. So if you have the luxury of being able to leave this material on here, that way the thing doesn't want to tilt down. It's not fatal to the project. If it does tilt down a little bit, it's just a little bit scary. And again, if you're like me, I hate routing. So I do this sort of as a safety thing and just makes it a lot easier. Then I'll just go ahead and cut that backside off of there, and that'll be that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and get all of these things cut, and then I'll show you a couple other little things, a couple other little tips that again just help when you go to do the final assembly. It gives you a little bit of wiggle room so that you can have a little wiggle room. Anyway, okay, so I cut my little tenons on the table. I'll show that to you in a little bit. It's not complicated. I just cut out where I had it marked. So here I am. This is the rig that I use for cutting mortises, and it's a simple rig, and I've made a video about how to use this more or less. So if you want to check that out, go ahead and check it out. But this is my breadboard here that I'm going to be using. And the one thing that you just want to be careful of when you're using this rig, especially when you're cutting deep mortises like this, is you want to make sure that the bit is straight this way and this way, because if your board isn't square to this thing or parallel, whatever you want to call it, you're going to cut a mortise that is at an angle, and then when you go to put your breadboard on, it'll be tilted up or it'll be tilted down, and that's a pain, particularly if you've milled everything the same size, the breadboard's the same size as the table. If you go to put it on and it's tilted down, there isn't really any way to correct that, particularly since the tenons and the mortises really have to be pretty precise on this. You want the friction because there's not a lot of glue that holds all of this together. So what I do is I just put the board, my breadboard, in here, and then I get it as close as I can to the edge of this bit, and then I just move it down and make sure that it's riding exactly parallel to this, which it is. And the other one, which is probably even more important, is this direction, front to back. So I just put this thing on here, this little square, and I put it right up against the edge, and I make sure that it runs nice and square right up there. And I've got some shims under here. My table must not be square to my bit or something. So I've got this whole setup right here so that this thing is nice and square to my bit and parallel to the bit. And now I'm going to sit here and make 27 inches of 2-inch deep mortises, which will take me a long time. But it's got to be done. This is a cool setup. You can get these things for pretty cheap. So if you don't have one and they're not complicated and they make quick work of mortises or relatively quick work of it, get one of these things. But in the meantime, go do something else. I'm gonna cut a bunch of mortises. See you in a little bit. Bottles of beer on the wall, 99 bottles of beer. Take one down, pass it around. 8 bottles of beer on the wall, 98 bottles of beer on the wall, 98 bottles of beer. All right. So I've got all my parts. I've got sort of everything just about done, really. And I realize I've sort of glossed over a bunch of stuff, but I thought it'd be easier to get everything done and then sort of show you how it goes together. And then you'll kind of understand the steps. If I'm just sort of explaining the steps, it'll get boring. And anyway, so I'll just show you sort of how the thing all comes together. Here's my 30 inches of mortise. That took a while and is a pain, but it is what it is. It's kind of what you have to do. But on the breadboards, my breadboard's much thicker than the table itself, and I do that on purpose. As I mentioned before, if you have any kind of, if your mortise goes in a little crooked or your tenons are a little crooked for whatever reason, this will sit up or it could sit down or something a little bit funky. If you leave everything thick, the breadboard that is, if you leave it thick, then you can plane it down. If you've milled all of your material or if you've purchased all your material and it's all 3/4 or something like that, or 1 inch or what have you, if it tilts up or down because of some sort of little imperfection, you don't have really any way to correct that. If you have to sand it down, then it's all of a sudden going to be too thin. So it really helps. And this is a tricky thing to do. It's a lot of big tenons and deep mortises and so forth. So leave yourself that margin of error. You'll be glad that you did. I guarantee you. It never seems to work out exactly perfect. So leave it thick. Leave your breadboard as thick as you possibly can. You'll be glad you did in the end. So my mortises are 3/8 of an inch, but I cut my tenons originally at 7/16 because there isn't a lot of glue. There's hardly any glue at all, in fact. The friction helps hold this on, and obviously the dowels driven through there help hold it on. So I make mine about 7/16 in this case, and then I just use a shoulder plane or a rabbet plane or sander or whatever you have, chisel, whatever you need to do, and I make it so that it fits on there nice and snug. You want it snug. You definitely don't want it. If it's loose, that's the kiss of death. So go a little bit big and work at it a little bit and get these tenons just right. So what I do, once I have the mortises done and the tenons done, I just whack the breadboard on there and then drill some holes in there and then take the breadboard back off. And they need to be elongated because obviously if you don't do that, then the dowels are going to hold the boards again and it won't be able to move. So they move inside these little channels right here. So once I had that hole there, then I really just take my jigsaw and nibble away and basically make these holes elongated like that. And that's in theory what allows it to move. This one is the one fixed one. You can have one fixed one, I guess, and everything in theory will move around that one. So this dowel will be fixed in this hole, and we'll put a little bit of glue on here too, just to hold that one spot. And then the rest of it is really just held on with the dowels. I've heard some guys say that they try to, when they'll drill their holes through their breadboard, and then they'll mark it on their tenons, and then try and drill their tenons just a skosh towards this, like a 30-second maybe. And that way when they drive their dowels through there, it actually pulls the whole breadboard down. If you do try and do that, it's a really tricky thing to do. I wouldn't do it on this fur because I think what would happen is it would just go at an angle and then blow the bottom of my breadboard off because it's too soft. But if you just come a little 30-second, it'll then find that hole and try and pull it down. But be very careful when you do that. It's pretty tricky, and it's a difficult thing to mark exactly when you're only talking about a 30-second. So if you do, err on the side of barely moving that thing forward. It's tricky. On this one, I just went straight through with my holes. I clamped it on there nice and tight and then drove my holes straight through there. And I use a Forstner bit because I think they cut nice clean holes on that breadboard and it looks good. So that's what we have here. One other thing I wanted to show you. So just before we go and tappity tap our dowels through there. So we're good there. The mortises, by the way, my tenons are about 9 inches. Make your mortises about 9.5, so that you have a 1/4 inch sort of on each side of the tenon. Again, that allows for the expansion. Don't make your mortises 9 inches if your tenons are 9 inches. Make them wide so that you have that the room to move around. The other thing that I do, when you drill your holes through here, you then, as you saw, have to elongate those holes. So I leave these edges still on here on my breadboards. I leave everything big. I love big because I like to make mistakes. That way, when it comes to having to take those off, I have the room to take it off. If you've cut everything exactly to size, it's hard if your mortises are nice and snug to get that breadboard back off. You kind of got to whack it on the side, and that becomes a problem. So we've got this pretty much all set up. I'm going to put it down on the table. We'll run our dowels in and see how we did. All right, well, she's done. Turned out pretty well. A couple things I just wanted to clear up. When I had the table leaned up vertically over here and I was explaining the tenons and how you could drill a little bit further towards the table, and I said it would pull it down. I was saying it'd pull it down just because I had the table vertically. What I meant is in, not that way. You don't want that. You want to pull it nice and tight. You probably figured that out, but I just wanted to clear that up. The other thing too is I have my dowels centered on the breadboard, and when you saw where it was on the tenons, the holes were pretty far out. I think if I had to do it again, I might pull those in just a little tighter, just to prevent like some sort of pivot point there on the end. Not that this is pivoting, it's not going anywhere, but I think I might do that. You can decide for yourself. But anyway, if you're going to do it, I hope this helps. At the very least, I hope now when you see a breadboard end, you can look at it and go, hey, I know what goes into that. So quite a bit of work. Not hard work, but sort of tedious work. But I think it's pretty cool. I like to contrast the woods, and I think it adds a little something. So this guy's just about ready to go outside. Anyway, everybody, stay peaceful, and I'll see you in the next one.